The Geometry of Almost. Chapter 1. Static at Sunrise. The morning sky was the color of a bruise that hadn't decided whether to heal or bloom. From our apartment balcony, the city stretched out like someone's messy desk stacks of faded rooftops, the river glinting like a ribbon of tape, alleyways scribbled in between everything. Somewhere a rooster was convinced it lived on a farm, not 4 floors above a noodle shop. He crowed like it was his job, like all the alarms on all the phones in the district owed him royalties. Mom passed me a bowl of hot soy milk and paper-thin youtiao. "Eat," she said, which is how she said good morning. "First day of 11th grade. Be early. Make an impression." I was planning to make exactly 0 impressions, I said, blowing the steam aside. In fact, I want to be a Roomba. Actually, less than a Roomba, a footnote. Footnotes are written by people who finish their homework, she said. I made a face and took a sip. The soy milk tasted like childhood. I tried not to think about how the summer had evaporated. I tried not to think about the half-built transmitter on my desk, or the box of Dad's old components beneath it, resistors wrapped in wax paper, a coil of copper wire, a soldering iron scuffed to the point of nostalgia. Mom was already dressed for her shift, hair twisted into a neat bun, the thin gold bracelet at her wrist reflecting strips of mourning. She pressed a hand to my cheek, then to my shoulder. "Khai," she said, "there are approximately 1,000,000 ways to say my name." She had chosen the careful one. "You texted your cousin? He's waiting?" "June says he's on his way," I said. My cousin's name was actually Twun, but everyone called him June because he'd once insisted that June is the best month. This was in 5th grade, and he'd never bothered to update his thesis or his name. Mom reached for the balcony railing and looked out like the sky might answer her. "I wish your father could see you in that uniform." My throat tried to swallow air and failed. He'd tell me to tuck in my shirt. He'd tell you to be kind, to yourself especially. She made her smile brave. And he would check your backpack to make sure you were carrying snacks because he never trusted cafeteria food. He would lecture the cafeteria about how sound travels the acoustics, and why it always makes the room seem meaner than it is. I laughed, because grief sometimes wears a disguise, and today it chose a bad impression of Dad. I slid into my shoes, slung my backpack on, and hugged her too tight. "I'll be home at 6, I said. "Robotics interest meeting." "You're joining a club," she said, pleased. "Good. Make friends. Maybe make something you can sell." "Relax," I said. "I'm not Elon Musk." "I don't know who that is," she said, straight-faced. "Should I worry?" I was still smiling when June's scooter beeped downstairs. The street was waking up vendors unrolling tarps, someone setting up a rack of phone cases. The smell of coffee, wet concrete, and early possibility. June handed me a helmet and flicked the visor with a knuckle. He was wearing a shirt that said, "If found, please return to the nearest library." "Your mom still thinks I'm a good influence, right?" he said. "She keeps her illusions in a special drawer," I said, strapping the helmet on. "She takes them out and polishes them." "Great," June said, pulling into traffic. "Let's not ruin her morning." We threaded the scooter into the river of commuters, past the park where old men played chess under trees and aunties slapped each other's shoulders as if that was cardio. The sun was trying to be brave behind the clouds. The city's soundtrack clicked into place, the double honk of buses, the gossip of birds, street vendors singing their inventories like folk ballads. "What's your goal for the year?" June shouted over the wind. "To graduate," I said. "Okay, but like Sub-goals? He said. Specificity is the difference between a wish and a plan. You sound like a guidance counselor, I said. I watched 3 productivity videos this morning to motivate my hair, he said. Look at it. Does it not scream optimized? It did not. It screamed, I fell asleep on my headphones again. My goal, he went on, is to get into the school podcast and expose the corruption at the heart of the canteen's fried chicken. Deep fried journalism, I said. I'm serious, he said. Those drumsticks are either time travelers or purchased in bulk from 1997. Maybe they're like bonsai, I said. You have to cultivate them for years. You're deflecting, he said. What's your goal, mister? Tucked-in shirt? I knew exactly what it was. I'd just never said it out loud. I wanted to build something that mattered, and then I wanted to put it into the world. I wanted to hear my own voice and not hate it. I wanted to figure out why Dad's box of parts felt like a map and not a museum. But I said, I guess I want to show up. For what? For myself, I said. So quietly the wind almost stole it. June glanced back and gave me the kind of grin that put loose screws back into place. Then let's show up. Our school rose at the end of a narrow street like a surprise, a stack of yellow buildings edged in peeling white, the courtyard tiled like a giant checkerboard, a tamarind tree offering gossip-level shade. Students moved through the gate with that first-day electricity. Everyone a little taller or shorter or louder than you remembered. There were new haircuts and braces, new sneakers and old reputations. The loudspeaker screamed feedback, and then the principal's voice stumbled out, asking us to gather for the flag. We parked, locked the scooter, and joined the tide. On the wall near the gate, someone had taped up last year's math contest poster. Someone else had drawn glasses and a mustache on the champion. A chorus of first years shouted hello at everything. A girl with a skateboard tucked under her arm wove through the crowd like she belonged on a postcard. Look, June said, nudging me. The exchange student. Which one? The one from France, he said, wiggling his eyebrows. Or was it Finland? A word that starts with F. Possibly fudge. That narrows it down, I said. He nodded toward the tamarind tree. A girl stood there like she'd been pinned into the morning hands in the pockets of an oversized jacket, her hair clipped back in a can't-be-bothered arc, eyes moving through her surroundings with the kind of attention that wasn't expecting to like what it found, but was considering being impressed anyway. She had a thin scar on her jaw, the kind that looked like it came with a story she did not intend to tell. I'm 90% sure that's Quinn, June said. Half French, half myth. Quinn, I repeated. And 30% sure I made that up, he said. I saw it on the orientation list. Also, she's in our grade. How do you know this much about people you've never met? I asked. June tapped his temple. I'm a collector of gossip. Also, I volunteered in the office last week to get the class lists and forgot to stop reading. We have Vun, Lee, Hoa together, and robotics. In fact, he waggled his eyebrows again. Guess who else is in robotics? Who? Your mortal enemy, he said. I don't have a mortal enemy. Not with that attitude, he said. It's Sang. I winced. He's not my mortal enemy. He's just competitive in a way that requires body armor. He once tried to outquiet me in a library, June said. He lost, obviously, but the point stands. We lined up in the courtyard. The principal delivered his address with the solemnity of a monk reading the weather report. He paused at the important words excellence, tradition, discipline, like he was putting them on the shelf where we could reach them later, if we felt like it. The teachers watched us with the tired affection of people who have survived teenagers and plan to do it again. We sang the anthem. We clapped at the appropriate times. The loudspeaker screamed feedback again, as if bored. Then, while schedules were being distributed and the crowd began to dissolve, a different voice came over the speaker. It was a voice that didn't belong to any adult I knew. It sounded like a kid trying to sound like a radio host and failing in a way that became charming, like a singer who hadn't found their note yet but was almost there. "Good morning, Crescent District," the voice said. It buzzed slightly, like it was traveling down a frayed rope. "This is Wave 88.7, unofficially the most official frequency for all your unofficial needs. If you can hear this, you're already cooler than you were 30 seconds ago. Our thoughts and prayers go out to the cafeteria's new microwave, which is going to see things it can never unsee. Stay kind, stay curious, and don't let the first bell tell you who you are." And, Ahab Dan, and in haste. By the time the principal wrestled the mic back, the courtyard had cracked into laughter and whispers. Students looked around as if the sky might be holding hands with a secret. Beside me, June's mouth was hanging open so far I could have installed shelves. "Did you?" he started, then stopped. "What is that? Who is that? Are we in a teen movie?" "Maybe someone bought a transmitter," I said, heart stampeding. "There are YouTube videos." "YouTube videos don't make you a pirate radio station," he said. "A pirate radio station makes you a pirate radio station. Khai, we are in the presence of a legend." I had to swallow twice before it worked. That voice had hit me like a hand on the shoulder, a familiar weight in an unfamiliar place. It wasn't that I recognized the speaker. It was that I recognized the feeling of the words. They sounded like someone had been writing to themselves and accidentally broadcast it to everyone. They sounded like the thing that sat half-built on my desk most of the summer. They sounded like a dare I hadn't taken yet. In physics, we drew diagrams of forces. Miss Lynn had cut her hair short and was wearing sneakers that meant business. "You can lie to your parents," she said, chalk tapping the board. "You can lie to your friends. You can lie to yourself if you are very skilled. You cannot lie to gravity." And in literature, the new teacher, Mr. Doan, handed us copies of a poem where the most important line was about a window that didn't open. He asked us what kind of window it was, and 6 people answered metaphor, which made him roll his eyes in a way that told me he was going to like us and we were going to like him back, but not yet. He looked like he'd been awake all night rearranging his bookshelves and thinking about the verb to yearn. At lunch, the canteen line wound like a question mark. The fried chicken did look suspiciously like a fossil. "This is journalism," June said, holding his tray at a safe distance. "Smell that? That's a scoop." "I smell regret," I said, "and star anise. Has. We ate under the tamarind tree. The girl with the skateboard dropped into the seat across from us, like gravity owed her a favor. She didn't look at us. She looked at her food the way climbers look at mountains. "You guys hear that radio thing this morning?" she said. June sprayed rice. "Do I look like a man who has not been fundamentally altered?" She nodded to herself. "Thought so." Then she looked up at me, like she was adjusting a camera and I had finally come into focus. "I'm Quinn," she said. Her voice did that thing cool, but not cold. She stuck out a hand. There was a silver ring on her middle finger shaped like an open door. "Khai," I said, taking her hand. It was not the right moment to notice her scar up close, that thin, pale line, almost invisible, unless you were paying attention. It curved like a comma. June, June said, raising a palm in a half-wave. I will be your guide to the canteen's failings. Perfect, she said. I love being disappointed. You're in robotics, right? I said. She picked up a drumstick, examined it like a relic, and put it back. Yeah, she said. I like building things that talk to other things and then pretend they don't. Machines are like that, secretly chatty. She glanced at me. You in it? I signed up, I said. Song's running for captain, June said, like he was given a weather warning. Of course he is, Quinn said, like she was reading a book she'd skimmed before. He looks like somebody invented shoulders for him. I tried not to laugh, failed, and almost inhaled my rice. After lunch, the sky pulled itself into a brighter version of blue, the kind that wanted to be photographed. The last 2 periods were a blur of names and rules and handouts. Someone whispered that the radio voice had played a song during second period, some old American love ballad that made the math teacher nostalgic and then suspicious. People had stories. Already someone had heard that the transmitter was hidden in the bell tower. Someone insisted it was the computer club, or the theater kids, or a freshman with too much time. Even the principal's eyebrows had rumors. After the final bell, June traded classes for his part-time job at the print shop. I went to the robotics lab, a room that smelled like burnt dust and ambition. The tables were crowded with parts, motors, wheels, wire, microcontrollers, with the Band-Aid look of blue tape over their ports. The bulletin board was a collage of last year's tournament photos. A robot that looked like a shopping cart decided it was a weapon. A group standing with a trophy no one would remember. In the center of it all, like his portrait was being painted by fluorescent lights, stood Sang. He was handsome in that athlete-engineer way, the veins in his hands looking like cables. He had the charisma of a traffic signal. You didn't have to like it, you had to obey it. Welcome, future tinkerers, he said. His smile was both confident and tired, like he was too good for this world and also extremely on time for it. I want this to be our year. New designs, new strategies. We're going to build something that wins, and we're going to do it together. He paused, scanning the room like it was a chessboard, and we were pieces he could whisper instructions to. We'll be dividing into sub-teams: mechanical, electrical, coding, media. Raise your hand for your preference. Quinn's hand went up for mechanical. Mine went up halfway for electrical and then decided to commit. I could feel the box of Dad's components under my bed like a heartbeat. Electrical, Sang said, pointing at me. What's your experience? I could have said, I learned to solder before I learned to whistle. I could have said, my dad made radios out of junk and taught me to listen to storms like they were broadcasting secrets. I could have said, I am scared of putting my name on anything that could disappoint me. Instead, I said, I built a few things. Things, he echoed politely, the way a waiter repeats your order so you feel catered to. Great. You'll pair with me to start. It should have felt like an honor. It felt like a contract I hadn't read. We broke into clusters. He handed me a roll of wire and a schematic for last year's control system. Walk me through it, he said. So I did. My voice steadied as the lines on the page made sense to my hands. The truth about circuits is that they are poems pretending to be instructions. They are promises written in copper. Current is just a word for a direction that's decided to become a habit. Voltage is a kind of longing. Resistance is what all of us learn to do too well. Not bad, he said when I finished. His approval slid over me like plastic. We'll be better than not bad this year. I can be better than not bad, I said. Good, he said. And then he was moving, a magnet rearranging iron filings. He leaned over another table, corrected a person's grip on a hex key, laughed at something too forcefully. The room oriented itself around him slightly, as if he was a ceiling fan. We stayed late enough for the room to soften around the edges. When I finally left, the courtyard had thinned out and the shadows were the long kind, the kind that whisper longer stories than you can tell in one go. I started home on foot because the air had cooled and because sometimes you have to arrive slowly to remember you are allowed to. Halfway down our street, I passed the alley where the boys played shuttlecock with a plastic one, feathered by someone's grandmother, and a soft dare. I passed the tailor who once looked at my uniform and fixed it while I was still wearing it, her hands a blur, her tape measure like a friendly snake. I passed the radio repair shop that had been closed all summer, its metal shutters scrawled with a phone number and a question, "Where did you go?" I stopped, because for a second the shutter reflected the sky just right, and I saw Dad as if he were walking toward me from inside the metal, the way he would hold his tools like they were extensions of his fingers, the way he'd stop in the doorway and look at Mom like he'd known a secret and she was the punchline, the way he said my name when he needed two hands to carry it. My heart did that thing, the thing that felt like someone had attached a wire to it and given it a tiny, efficient shock. The box in my room was waiting, the half-built transmitter too. The pirate broadcast at school had turned the volume up on everything I hadn't said. If someone else could do it, could say those things, even as a joke, then maybe the world wasn't as locked as it looked. When I got home, Mom was still at work. I made myself instant noodles, the fancy kind with the oil packet that always looks suspicious and tastes like a miracle. Then I went to my desk and opened the box. It smelled like dust and possibility. I lined everything up like a ritual, resistors in a lazy rainbow, capacitors like fake tiny mushrooms, a bag of transistors with legs so skinny I felt bad for them, the solder, coiled and patient, the breadboard, pockmarked from last year's experiments. My notebook lay open to a page of sketches. I had started with modest ambition, something small that could transmit across a couple apartments, maybe to June's if he propped his window open. But every time I drew the antenna taller, every time I wondered about frequencies the school radio didn't use, my pencil seemed to have its own ideas. The morning's voice was in my head again. Unofficially, the most official frequency for all your unofficial needs. "I'm not a thief," I told the room, as if it had suggested something. "I just want to see if the sky is listening." The sky, uninterested, was already working on sunset. I soldered until my shoulder hurt and my room smelled like pennies and lightning. When I plugged in my little amp and the breadboard and the coil I'd wrapped around a paper towel tube, the speaker responded with a thread of static. It was the softest thing, like someone whispering on the other side of a curtain. I adjusted a resistor. The static grew teeth. I touched the antenna, and it turned my skin into a wire. The hiss became a voice, and then lost it again. I kept thinking about Dad's hands. He had the kind of fingers that made everything look like an instrument. After he got sick, he would sit by the window and build tiny things that could fit inside a pocket, little radios with faces, invented from old parts he joked were reincarnated. He said the sky was crowded with all the things we wished we'd said, and that radio was how you borrowed a few. I'd decided that summer that I would become a person who didn't flinch when things mattered, that I would go from almost to enough. The plan had been to test a transmitter by the end of August, Then to record something stupid, a hello, a song, a story about the time June convinced me to sneak into the pool at night, and I discovered I was allergic to rules that involved fences. But grief, it turns out, obeys no deadlines. It flows around your calendars like water around ankles. The static softened to a sound that wasn't quite music and wasn't the absence of music either. I pressed my ear to the speaker. I turned the knob a hair to the left and then a hair to the right. It was like trying to tune a memory. Don't let the first bell tell you who you are, the morning voice had said. It wasn't that the words were revolutionary, it was the permission inside them. It was the hand on the shoulder. It was the idea that your voice could exist even before you knew what to use it for. My phone buzzed. A message from June. June, you home? I need you to hear my Canteen Expose headline. What is chicken if not past chicken persisting? Poetry. June. Also, did you hear the radio again during last period? Played something by Frank Ocean. I think the school is in love. My classroom is on the wrong frequency for love. June. Try building an antenna out of your feelings. I'm soldering one as we speak. June. Of course you are. Okay, serious question. What if we did one broadcast? Just one. A nice one. No chaos. Like the opposite of morning announcements, evening confessions. Anonymous. We could call it the geometry of almost me. Why? June. Because that's what we are, until we decide not to be. I stared at the words. June joked the way climbers test ropes, yanking just enough to see if they hold. But sometimes he hid real ideas in jokes like pearls in oysters. I could see it. A nighttime hour with our clumsy voices. No adults, just the neighborhood. Not rumors, not pranks. Stories. Songs from phones that had cracked screens but perfect playlists. The feeling of being awake together when we were supposed to be asleep. I'd need to finish this. June. You've been finishing it since July? Mom will murder me if she hears I'm a radio criminal. June. I will give the eulogy. Khai died doing what he loved, apologizing for being interesting. Wow. And June. I'm serious. Not tonight, but soon? Me. Maybe. June. That's your favorite word. It's accurate. June. It's almost. I put the phone face down. The static in the speaker put its arm around the room. Outside, the alley kids had evolved their shuttlecock game into something with rules I couldn't decode. Someone turned on a TV too loud, and a tangle of laughter escaped like a pet. I tuned a little more. The hiss dropped an octave. Suddenly, just under the noise, a shape formed. Not words, not melody, but a pattern like the sound of rain on a metal roof 2 blocks away, like the memory of a chorus. I didn't breathe. I tuned again, and through the fuzz, like a person singing from far away with a scarf around their mouth, a voice arrived. Not the morning voice, not Dad, a girl maybe. A few syllables made it through, then fell apart. It wasn't English or Vietnamese in that moment. It was the language of someone trying. It hit me like being chosen for a team you hadn't tried out for. Hello? I said to no one, to the static, to whatever is between sciences. I'm here. The pattern dissolved. The room returned to its hum. But something had tilted, like the desk had changed angles by half a degree, and now my pens were thinking about rolling. I looked at the antenna, the paper towel tube wrapped in wire, the coat hanger I'd bolted to the balcony railing, the wire snaking out like an idea I could not put back in the box. My phone buzzed again, but not from June. A number I didn't recognize. Unknown. Is this Kaitran at Gmail? This is Mr. Doan. I got your email on the volunteer list for the literary magazine. We're relaunching. Meeting Friday after school. You said you like voices. What did you mean? I had filled out so many forms that day I barely remembered writing that. My thumbs hovered. The truth felt like a door I might walk through and end up somewhere new. The lie felt like home, which was the problem. I meant people telling who they are and not apologizing for it. A pause. Then, Mr. Doan. Good answer. Bring something you've made. Poem, song, sentence, secret, anything. I stared at my desk, at the tangle of wire, at the way my breath and the static were beginning to agree on a rhythm. I tried to imagine what I had made, besides this half-translated language of circuits. When Mom came home, she put her bag down like it weighed more or less than it had this morning and found me in the doorway of my room, my hair carrying the faint scent of solder. She looked at the wires and then at me. Her eyebrows formulated a question and then rearranged into a sigh. You're building your father's voice again, she said. I'm building mine, I said, before I could flinch. She paused the way people pause when they find a spider in the bathtub and decide whether to move it or name it. Then she flicked the light on and off once. As long as you don't blow the fuse, she said. Dinner? We ate at the small table by the window. The rooftops outside were collecting the last light like bowls. Mom told me a story about a customer who had tried to return shoes because their dog had eaten the box. And I told her about Miss Lynn and gravity, and about how the canteen had possibly invented time travel. I didn't tell her about Quinn's scar or my heart when it pretended to be a wire. I didn't tell her about the voice I thought I'd heard in the static. Not yet. Some stories are like yeast. They require time to become what they promise. After we washed dishes, she stood at my door. Your father, she said softly, as if she was about to ask permission, told me once that when he was a boy, he would stand on the roof at night and listen to the city as if it were a radio. He said he could hear the different stations' parents' arguments, lovers laughing, friends being ridiculous, babies being unreasonable. He said the trick was not to think you could fix any of it. The trick was to listen until you understood you were part of it. I looked at the balcony. The coat hanger looked back. Somewhere outside, a motorbike revved like a decision. What if I want to fix some of it? I asked. Then start with your room, she said, because she is a mother and therefore keeps the world from containing too much poetry. But then she added, almost like an apology, and remember that voices are not broken just because they're different. She kissed the top of my head and went to her room, her bracelet making a small sound on the doorframe like a bell that only rang for us. Night poured itself into the corners. I finished my homework the way a person pulls thorns from their socks after walking through a field. I sent June a meme of a chicken complaining about its existential dread. He replied with a recording of himself whispering, "This is your conscience. It says, do the radio." I refused to reply on principle. At 11, the neighborhood softened into its sleepy self. I slid the balcony door open. The air smelled like distant rain that might not arrive. I took a breath, touched the wire to the little transmitter, adjusted the knob. Static. Then the blank between. Then, like someone finding me in the dark by accident, a faint signal, flaring and fading, never quite becoming a song, never quite refusing to. I tried 3 frequencies we weren't supposed to be near. Then 4. I stayed away from the one the school used for actual announcements. When I turned the knob to 88.7, The static sharpened and then unspooled. For a breath, I heard the end of a word, not enough to identify the language, just enough to know it had wanted to become one. Then a laugh, low and surprised. Then the whisper of a hand over a microphone. Almost time, a voice said, far away and underwater. I jerked my hand back, heart punching politely but insistently at my ribs. The voice wasn't the morning one. It wasn't me. It wasn't imaginary. It was someone else. Someone else nearby. Someone else with a transmitter or something like it. Someone else whose voice had found the same shape in the dark. I leaned into the speaker like prayer. "Hello?" I whispered again, as if the wire could carry the weight of my wanting. But the signal was already a memory. I sat there for a long time with the static. I thought about how in physics we draw arrows to represent forces, as if the world is a place where you can point and be sure. I thought about the station this morning wave, either a joke or an invitation. I wondered if they were real, or a glitch that had taught itself to talk. I wondered if a person could put their voice into a city and have it come back better. At some point, I must have fallen asleep with my head on the desk because I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating against the wood like it was trying to tunnel through. The screen told me it was 12:07 a.m. The message was from an unknown number, no name, just this, unknown. If you're listening, we can hear you too. I sat up so fast the chair complained. The room felt suddenly too small, as if walls were a dress code I'd forgotten we had. Me. "Who is this?" The reply was instant, as if they'd been waiting under a breath. "Unknown. We're nobody. Tomorrow 6:30 a.m. tune in. Bring a question, not the easy kind." I stared at the words until the meaning became a shape I recognized. Tomorrow was already happening. 6:30 a.m. was when the sky still pretended to belong to the birds. Bring a question, not the easy kind. "Okay," I said to the room, to the wire, to the version of myself that had slept through the safe parts of this summer. "Okay." I closed my eyes and tried to find the question I would bring. Not the one about whether the year would swallow me, not the one about whether I could become a person who showed up. Those were easy, which is to say, they had 1,000 answers and none of them were useful. The question that finally arrived was shaped like my mother's bracelet and my father's hands and the way my name sounds when it's choosing to be new. It was the question that the morning voice had smuggled into the courtyard and left on the ground for us to trip over. How do I become the person I already am when no one is watching? I wrote it down. I set 3 alarms. I turned off the transmitter and then turned it on again, twice, a ritual I invented on the spot. I crawled into bed and let the neighborhood blow out its candles. When my breathing finally matched the statics, I let sleep find me, and when it did, I dreamed of a city made of antennas, everyone's windows open, everyone talking, nobody apologizing. Before the sun, my first alarm found me. I lay still for a moment, listening for a rooster with time management issues. He didn't disappoint. I padded to the balcony, the air cool against the sleep still on my skin. The sky was that bruise again, reconsidering itself. I plugged in the amp and the breadboard, the coil and the antenna. My phone said 6:28. In the building across the alley, a kid played a video game at a volume that would be illegal in some countries. A woman with a broom negotiated with a stubborn tile. I tuned to 88.7. Static shook itself awake. I held my breath. For a second, nothing. Then a crackle, A clearing of a throat, a nervous giggle smothered just in time. A new voice, not the morning one, not the underwater one. Someone who sounded like they were trying not to be themselves and failing, and therefore succeeding. "Good morning, insomniacs and accidental early birds," the voice said, soft but confident in the way you are when you know you've risked the right thing. "This is Wave, unofficial and unprepared, broadcasting on borrowed time. We said bring a question. We didn't say we'd have an answer." I leaned closer. My heart forgot its job. "But we brought one too," the voice continued. "Here it is. What part of yourself did you leave on the roof when you climbed down? We'll be here until the first bell, pretending it doesn't get to decide. We're not going to say who we are. We're not going to name anyone else. We're just going to listen. We'll play a song from the attic. We'll tell a story nobody asked for. And maybe if the sky is generous, someone will hear their own voice." I looked at my notebook, at the question I had written. I picked up my phone. My thumbs hovered. My throat was a sizzle. What do you do when the person you most wanted to ask for directions built a map that only leads to a hospital? I didn't send it. Not yet. I watched the sky consider the Sunday. The city stretched like a cat. Downstairs, the noodle shop clanged pans like a parade. Across the alley, a window opened, and someone watered plants that looked like a choir of green hands. I turned the knob a fraction. The voice on 88.7 laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that made a room feel bigger. "All right," they said, "let's start." And just before the music started, a song that sounded like you'd left your window open and a stray piano had wandered in, I thought I heard something behind the voice, a whisper. It was so quick I almost missed it. It said, as if it had been rehearsing all night, "We can hear you, Khai." I didn't move, not even to breathe, and that is how my year began. A morning that smelled like solder and steam, a voice that knew my name, a question that finally asked me back. It would be months before I'd understand what I had agreed to, and days before we'd put our voices into the night for the first time, and hours before I'd meet the rest of the people who would teach me what almost meant. But in that moment, with the rooster congratulating himself and the sky learning to be sky again, I understood something I hadn't before. Growing up wasn't walking away from who you were. It was learning the right frequency. It was tuning, slowly, until static became a song. Chapter 2. The Frequency of Enough. At 6:31 the next morning, the song on 88.7 drifted into a voice like a match struck in a dark room. It didn't explain itself. It didn't apologize. It just continued the way rain does because it was already on the way. "Wave again," the voice said, with the reluctant grin of a person who knows they're being brave whether they want to or not. Today's small human miracle. The city woke up and pretended it hadn't been practicing all night. We asked for a question. We brought one of our own. "What part of yourself did you leave on the roof when you climbed down?" A pause. The sound of paper being turned. Someone texted, "How do I become the person I already am when no one is watching?" Whoever you are, that's not an easy kind. That's the right kind. My fingers tightened around the balcony rail. Steam drifted from the noodle shop downstairs. A motorbike rattled an argument with a pothole. Across the alley, the kid who played video games had graduated to brushing his teeth with the intensity of a surgeon. "We don't have answers," the voice said, "but we have a story about a friend who used to sing only in stairwells because the squeaky echo made him feel less alone. Now he sings on buses, quietly. People pretend not to hear, but they breathe easier. Maybe the private version is the practice. Maybe the public version is the gift. A different voice came in, lower, like sugar in black coffee. Also, new microwave report. It survived its first night. We salute the lunchroom staff and their courage. A snort off mic. A knock on wood. The song returned, a piano walking downstairs carefully. I thought of my question written in my notebook, and how the voice had read it without me sending it. I thought of last night's text, if you're listening, we can hear you too, and tried to imagine who we were. An ordinary we, with ordinary shoes and a secret. A we made of 2 or 3 or 5 kids who had decided that air could be borrowed and shared. June's scooter beeped and then coughed outside. "Citizen radio," he said when I swung my leg over the seat. "Citizen breakfast." He handed me a bag. Inside, 2 banh mi and a sticky rice ball he'd labeled in marker, "Emotional support carb." At the red light by the canal, he shouted, "Did you hear? Did you hear? The question? Our question?" They read a version of our question? "I didn't send it," I said, into the wind. "That's concerning," he said cheerfully. "Either we're haunted, or they stole your drafts with witchcraft." He leaned into a turn. The water below was the color of stubborn tea. Vendors were rehearsing for the day by making the day happen. "I wrote an outline for the podcast expose," he went on. "Working title, The Chicken That Time Forgot." Subhead, A Fried Investigation. I need a sound effect of an oil bubble screaming. "We'll record it on your face," I said. He nodded. "Perfect." At school, the courtyard felt like a story already halfway told. Clusters of kids whispered about the radio. A rumor said WAVE stood for "We Are Very Everything." Another rumor said it stood for nothing because names were traps. In literature, Mr. Doan's eyes found mine like he'd been expecting them. He wrote a single sentence on the board, "Let me tell you what I thought I was, and where that got me." "For Friday," he said, tapping the chalk under the line. "Bring me something with a voice. You can bring it on paper, or music, or the air." He didn't look toward the ceiling speakers when he said it, but he didn't not look either. At lunch, under the tamarind tree, Quinn ate half her sandwich and saved the other half in her jacket pocket like it might be a letter. "Do you think it's a club?" she asked, watching the courtyard like a photographer, not like a spy. "A revolution with snacks?" June said. "A small one," she said. "Revolutions that last are always the small ones." It said for, and she'd skated to school that morning. The board rested against the bench as if it were napping. The faint scar on her jaw pinned its flash of history to the light. "You were quiet in robotics yesterday," she said to me. "You're not a quiet person. How would you know?" She shrugged, not unkindly. "Quiet people don't build radios, they build boats." "Quiet boats? That's different," June gasped. "We've been profiled." I thought of the text. "Bring a question, not the easy kind." "What did you leave on the roof?" I asked her. She considered. "The version of me who thinks there's only one correct way to do things," she said finally. "She's always wrong. Also, she's always cold. She can stay up there." "And you?" she asked me. "My hands," I said. "They've been pretending they're just hands." We looked at our food as if it might confess something on our behalf. In robotics, Sang unrolled a plan like a flag. "We're moving to brushless motors for the drive. More torque, cleaner control, media team. We need a new brand concept. Last year was uninspired. He smiled the way a person smiles when they remember to. Quinn raised a hand. "Brushless will help," she said. "We should also revisit the weight distribution. The chassis is too front-heavy. On ramps, we'll fishtail." T noted, he said, not writing anything down. "And electrical?" he asked, looking at me. "We're redesigning the control board to minimize noise. EMI killed us last year." The word noise always made my stomach feel like a socket. "Shielding," I said, "and ground returns with shorter loops. We can twist pairs on the PWM signals. Also, the power bus is screaming for a star topology instead of the current daisy chain." He gave me a smile like an invoice. "Great initiative. Also," I added before I could stop myself, "we should consider adding ferrite beads on the receiver leads, and maybe, move the battery away from the ESCs. They're talking too much." The team's heads swiveled. The schematics in front of me looked suddenly naked. I wished I had been less fluent. I wished I had been more fluent. I wished I could sit in my own skin without rearranging the furniture every 5 minutes. "Ambitious," Sang said. "It's all so basic," Quinn said. His eyes flicked toward her. Not angry, calculating. "We'll prototype both," he said. "Meeting adjourned for today." When the room thinned out, he stopped me at the door with a palm that wasn't a barrier but wasn't not one. "You have good instincts," he said. "Just remember the team has a pace. If you sprint when everyone else is stretching, you'll look like a show-off and feel like a fool." "I can stretch faster," I said, trying to make the sentence carry zero resentment. "And I'm not trying to look like anything." He nodded, as if I'd confirmed a theory. "Then don't." Outside, the sky had selected a kind of cloud that promised drama and then delivered only shade. On the way home, I passed the shuttered radio repair shop and its question, "Where did you go?" I thought about how you could put that sentence anywhere in the city and still be right. At my desk, the transmitter waited like a tame, patient animal. I opened the notebook and wrote rules for myself in a column titled, "If we do this, do it right." 1. No cruelty. 2. No names without permission. 3. No pretending we're not scared. 4. Music that makes you feel less alone. Broadcasts end with an invitation, not a conclusion. I erased "we" and wrote "I." I erased "I" and wrote "we" again. The city outside my window shook lint off its shoulders. In the apartment across the alley, someone tried a piano scale and got lost halfway up the stairs. They tried again. Better. They tried again. Excellent. If being ordinary and trying is excellent, which it is, I decided, quite often. At 8:02 that night, the unknown number returned. Unknown. Tomorrow. Foot of the old bell tower. 5:40 a.m. Bring a 220 Omega resistor, tan with red stripes. Sign of life. Why me? Unknown. BC, you built a listening post out of a paper towel tube and a coat hanger. BC, your solder smells like mornings. BC, you typed a question you didn't send. Who are you? Unknown. Just a frequency. Choose. I didn't tell Mom. I didn't not tell her. Some things feel truer before their shadows touch other people's faces. I set 3 alarms and 1 silent promise. If this was a prank, I would survive it. If it wasn't, I would survive that too. The bell tower was older than our school and younger than the tree beside it. It had a door that didn't lock properly and stairs that hated knees. At 5:41, the courtyard was a stage with the audience turned away. The air was learning to be gold. The person waiting by the base didn't look like a pirate or a prophet. She looked like Quinn. She held up a little paper envelope, the kind pharmacy vitamins come in, and shook it. It rattled like small rain. 220 ohms, she said. 3 of them, in case. I stared. She stared back, her mouth doing the smallest possible smile so it wouldn't become something else by accident. You, I said, which was lazy and wrong and everything. Me, she said, and not just me. She led me up the side stairs that pretended they weren't telling a secret. The inside of the tower was a museum of dust and brave birds. On the landing halfway up, someone had painted a tiny, respectable door on the wall where no door had ever been. Under it, exit for cowards. A spray paint heart had been added later by a person who loved either irony or someone named Coward. At the top, under the eaves where bells used to argue, a table had been borrowed from somewhere. 2 folding chairs pledged temporary allegiance. A rectangle of old carpet declared itself a personality. On the table, a small box with knobs and a solder joint that wore its bandage like a medal. A coiled length of copper wire. A laptop with stickers like travel stamps. A handheld mic that had been wrapped with black tape until it forgot it had once been bright. A boy about my age sat cross-legged on the carpet, winding copper around the skeleton of what had started life as a coat rack. He had kind eyes, the kind that make you consider telling the truth. A girl younger than us freshmen maybe looked up from the laptop and nodded like I'd made my appointment on schedule, and she appreciated punctuality on a spiritual level. I'm hooey, the boy said, holding out a palm with burn marks as honest as geography. I like maps and imposter syndrome. My, the girl said, I code like I'm knitting a sweater for a moving car. And you know, Quinn, Huey said, she pretends not to be a good person. It's cute. She threw a resistor at him. He caught it without looking, which made me like both of them more than was convenient. You know my name, I said. We try not to, Quinn said, but some people glow. Huey gestured to the table. We're wave when we feel brave enough to be plural. Some mornings it's just one of us, some mornings none. But it's a we in the way most good things are. You can be we too, Mai added, if you bring snacks and ethics. The ethics are non-negotiable, Quinn said. She pointed at the paper on the table. In block letters, kinness or nothing. We don't roast people, Hui said. We don't say names. We don't turn rumor into content. We are the negative of a megaphone. We try to make loud things softer and soft things louder, and we're always about to get caught, Mai said, fingers skating over keys. So we keep it light, portable. We don't transmit long. We leave the dial as clean as we found it. Why me? I asked. Because my brain is a cassette that wants to flip sides at the exact wrong time. Quinn put the little brown envelope in my palm and closed my fingers around it. Her hand was calloused in a way that made skateboards make more sense. Because you listen like it's your job, she said softly. Because you don't pretend that's not terrifying. And because your face during robotics yesterday looked like a person trying not to build something that might work too well. We heard your coil, Hui said, tapping the copper. Mai sniffed your frequency. It's a gift. I laughed, dumb with relief and astonishment. You were the underwater voice, I said to Mai, remembering the whisper on 88.7 between the static. Last night. Almost time. Her eyes crinkled. I panic whisper when I'm excited. Quinn leaned on the table, forearms steady. We need your hands, she said. Our range is mostly the courtyard and some lucky blocks. We want to reach the neighborhood morning just enough to bump into people who don't get courtyards. But if we push too hard, we get attention, and attention ruins almost everything. We need smart, fancy, grounded copper. We need what you are. What if I break it? I asked. Then we fix it, Hui said. Or we let it be broken. Some things aren't tragedies. They're seasons and day. I thought of Dad at the window building pocket radios out of the dead and the not yet. I thought of Mom flicking the light saying, as long as you don't blow the fuse. I thought of my rules list with its we and I problem, the knot in my chest loosened by a half knot. What if I get in trouble? I asked, because I do not know how not to ask the most obvious question last. Quinn's mouth did that small smile again, the one that felt like someone sneaking a star into your pocket. Then we will have deserved it, she said, or we will have to be braver. Either way, we won't let you be the only one who pays. We tuned that morning before the first bell. We kept the power low, the antenna shy. The signal held like a hand you don't grip too hard. The broadcast was small. A poem I loved that fit inside a breath. A song Hui had recorded on his phone from his grandmother's kitchen. A list Quinn read of things that were better than winning. Good screws, deep breaths, laughter you don't have to translate. I said nothing. I watched the needle tremble in the VU meter like it was learning to trust itself. At 6:58, we signed off with the sentence we'd agreed on. Stay kind, stay curious, and don't let the first bell tell you who you are. Quinn killed the transmitter in the same motion you snap a thread with your teeth. On the stairs down, my hands shook. Not the scared shake, the other one. The I remembered shake. The A frequency found us first shake. Friday, Quinn said at the bottom, casual and oxygen-rich. You bring something to read on air. Literary magazine meets after school, too. Think of it as cross-pollination. Bees, Hui said solemnly. Bees, Ma echoed, as if that made everything scientific. In literature, Mr. Doan wrote another sentence on the board, but I couldn't stop hearing our sign-off sitting inside his like a spoon in a drawer. He assigned us to small groups for Friday's meeting. We need an audio arm, he said, cheeks betraying only half a smile. Stories you can hear, not a podcast. Something less branded. Something more true. June sent me a photo of his typed expose outline with the comment, need a co-host who is emotionally prepared for deep fryer trauma. I sent him a microphone emoji and a chicken. He replied with 47 chickens and a heart. After school, robotics felt like a room that was pretending not to be a ship. The work was good, the current ran, the code compiled. But the team moved to a rhythm set by a drum I didn't like the sound of. It was the rhythm of almost listening, of almost collaboration, of a captain who didn't want a crew so much as a mirror. We stayed late to build the first test chassis. After a while, Quinn wiped her palms on her jeans and said, "We're going to flip on the ramp. We'll adjust," Sang said without looking. "Or we could design for not flipping," she said, friendlier than the sentence sounded. "We'll adjust," he repeated. He placed the last bolt like a period and locked the nut like an alibi. When the robot nosed the practice ramp and fishtailed, it did exactly what she'd said it would do. It flipped delicately, like a gymnast who had decided to be a sculpture mid-air. No one laughed. We had all wanted to. "Okay," Sang said finally. To his credit, "Ideas." He looked at me. I looked at the floor. There's a mean trick the world plays on shy people who can't help it. It makes the truth feel like arrogance, and silence feel like ethics. I was tired of losing to that trick. "Move the battery," I said. "Shift the center back 3 centimeters. Angle the front plate. And if we cut this and this," I pointed, "we can mount a second brace without blowing our weight." He stared at the aluminum the way you look at a sentence until it admits you're right. "Show me," he said finally. We stayed until the janitor coughed apologetically and the room remembered it was tired. By the time the robot climbed the ramp without making theater of it, the sky had folded itself into its night pocket. On the way home, my phone buzzed. Unknown. Tonight, 10:30, 1 hour only. The geometry of almost. Your cousin says he can host. He used 9 emojis to ask me. You asked June? Unknown. It's possible he asked us first without knowing he was asking us. He put a flyer in the print shop window, looking for radio ghosts. We applied. I sent the only correct reply to that sentence, an image of a ghost eating noodles, and then set about convincing my mother that homework would be better done after a walk. She watched me like a scientist who has discovered a new species and is deciding whether to name it after her grandmother. "Don't do anything stupid," she said finally. "I don't know how to do anything else," I said, and kissed her cheek before she could be irritated. We kept the equipment small. The handheld mic, the small box with its stitched-up joints, the coil we had wound into something that looked like a bracelet for a god. June hosted from the back room of the print shop, where the smell of ink made everything earnest. We put 2 chairs in front of the open door. We let people sit if they wanted. We let people hover if that was their verb. "Good evening, Crescent District," June began, and he sounded like himself pretending to be himself, which is maybe the difficulty and the point. "You've stumbled into the geometry of almost. We have no idea what we're doing, and we have waited our entire lives to do it." He nodded at me, and I read what I had brought. 3 paragraphs I'd written at my desk about Dad's pocket radios, about the way grief is an AM station you can pick up at night when the air is thin enough to be honest, about the smell of solder and the way the city sometimes feels like it's leaning in. I didn't say his name. I didn't have to. He was there in the grammar. Quinn read a list titled "On Days When Winning Is Not the Right Verb," and it included such items as 4. Return the screwdriver you borrowed without being asked. 7. Say good game and mean it. 10. Attempt the harder kindness. Mai played a recording of her little brother describing the moon as a cold watermelon, and somehow it made everyone in earshot decide to live another day. Hoy told a story about getting lost on purpose and finding a map folded into a library book like a dare. We kept it open. People stopped at the door to listen. A man from the fruit stall told a joke nobody had asked for. A girl from our school read a poem she had written on a bus ticket about her braces. The way she said sounded like a river learning to hiss. A construction worker asked if we knew any songs by a singer his ex loved. We didn't. So he sang one line a cappella, and it cracked the air in a way that made 2 teenagers at the back pretend they had something in their eyes. An auntie scolded us for being out late and then stayed for 20 minutes pretending to count change. At 11:05, we took a message. It sounded like a boy our age with a voice that had decided to deepen but hadn't decided whether to echo. He didn't say his name. He called from somewhere with an echo that sounded like tile. "What do you do?" he asked. "If you're supposed to be the person who knows the answer and all you hear is the sound of the wrong screws?" I didn't think. Or rather, I thought the way you breathe. "You name the wrong screws," I said. You let someone hand you the right ones. You say thanks out loud so the room hears. You stop pretending you are the only person with thumbs. Silence. Then a small laugh like metal forgiving itself. Copy, he said. The line clicked. I did not think of the chassis. I did not think of the captain. I did not think of him either. We ended the hour with a song Huy had stitched together from bits of audio he'd found: kitchen pots, scooter brakes, the scrape of a chair, a cat negotiation, a snippet of our anthem hummed by someone who didn't know they knew it. It sounded exactly like home, which is unfair, because how dare something be that right on a weeknight? We signed off with kindness or nothing and walked out into the narrow midnight. The city was softer in profile. The print shop's fluorescent light hummed like a shy friend. June looked at us all like a person who had invited trouble home and found out it could cook. That was stupid, he said, shaking his head. I am so proud. We cleaned up, we unplugged, we ghosted our footprints in the dust. On the way home, Quinn skated slowly, and I walked beside her, the coil under my arm warm through the cloth like it had a fever. At some point, she said, we're going to get in trouble. And did not. We'll deserve it, I echoed, because I had learned her tone, and it fit my mouth. We stopped at the corner where the streetlight flickered like a kid winking too much. She put her board down and looked at me like a person checks if a wire is live without touching it. If we do get in trouble, she said, we'll decide then whether to be brave or to apologize. Most days, I think they're the same thing. Do you ever get tired of not being sure? I asked. All the time, she said. That's why we built a machine that pretends. At home, Mom had left a bowl of cut fruit on the table with a note. Don't be a criminal. Be a citizen with interesting timing. I ate 3 pieces and left her a receiver on the balcony. Just a little radio with the dial set to 88.7 and a sticky note that said, if you can't sleep. We kept doing it. Not every night, not every morning. Enough. The neighborhood learned that if you woke at odd hours with a question that didn't want an answer, you could turn the dial and not feel foolish by yourself. The cafeteria ladies started leaving us short poems about soup. The security guard who pretended to be grumpy called in once and told a story about the time he fell in love in 1978. Mr. Doan never said he knew, but in literary magazine meetings, he assigned us questions that sounded like radio checks. Robotics got better the way practice does. Slowly, then obviously. The robot didn't flip anymore unless it was being dramatic on purpose. The team started to move together like a person with 4 hands. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when Sang arranged us like tools, but sometimes he listened. Sometimes he let silence do the work. Once, after a long build day, he stopped me by the door the same way he had before. I called your show, he said, looking at a point 2 meters left of my face. What show? I said. Because if there's a rule about pirate radio, it is that you do not confirm you know the pirate radio. He smiled without humor. The thing, the almost thing, the screws thing. Oh, I said. The word contained at least 6 sentences. He nodded like we were both carrying a heavy box and had just agreed not to drop it. Thanks, he said. Then he did something I had not seen him do before. He asked a question. If we win because you were right, is that still winning for me? I should have said yes immediately. I didn't. I thought about it and then said, if we win because we were right together, it might feel different than winning alone. It might feel like building a machine that refuses to break you to work. He considered that. I don't know how to do that, he said. Me neither, I said, but I think we already are. He's no half to his. At regionals, the robot did what machines do when you teach them how to be useful without telling them to be cruel. It worked. It also broke when it needed to, loudly and in public. We fixed it with the speed born of midnight practice and the calm born of lack of surprise. We placed not first, not last, enough to make a bus ride home feel like a choir and a nap simultaneously. The morning after, 88.7 stayed quiet on purpose to see if anyone would ask. People did. We answered with a song and a receipt, and a recording of a boy laughing in a stairwell, and a list titled Things We Learned from Losing That We Couldn't Have Learned from Winning, that took 14 minutes and made a kid, named Long Cry, for the first time since second grade. And then one afternoon in March, the sky chose violence. The storm came in with its elbows out. Power winked in and then decided it had other commitments. The school became a cave briefly, and then a ship, and then a chorus of phone flashlights. The bell turned into a rumor. We were supposed to be rehearsing for finals. We were not. We were learning that the city is a body, and sometimes it forgets how to stand up, and sometimes you get to be a knee. We met under the bell tower with the small box and the coil and a battery we had no right to have charged. We tuned to 88.7 while the wind negotiated with the tree and lost politely. We spoke carefully, like you speak in a room where there are sleeping babies and stolen dogs. This is wave, I said into the dark, because it was, and because during the storm we had given each other the word. Unofficial, unprepared. If you can hear us, we can hear you. Check in. The neighborhood did. Nothing dramatic, just voices counting themselves present. I'm fine. Candle lit, dog under bed, sister on phone with grandma. My roof is a drum. My fear is a drum. My laugh is a drum. The power came back in patches like splotches of watercolor. When it reached our building, Mom texted, "Heard you, the sky, and I approve. Soup later." When the wind calmed and the rain remembered it could be pretty, we signed off. We turned the dial like we were closing a window we were grateful to have opened. On the way down the steps, Mr. Doan was waiting in the half-light like a parenthesis. He looked at the coil, at the box, at our faces, which were guilty in that we had been alive. He said, simply, "Can I borrow you for the literary magazine audio arm?" Quinn raised an eyebrow. "Borrow? Okay," he said, mouth making a shape I realized with a jolt was pride. "Steal, with permission. We'll call it something less illegal. I'll explain to the principal that we're teaching orality, community building, soft infrastructure, whatever words make adults exhale. You keep the ethics. You keep the ghosts." "What about the frequency?" Mai asked. Purely practical. He smiled the kind of smile you don't often get from adults at school. "You keep that too," he said, "when you need it." We didn't stop wave. We didn't institutionalize it either. We did what good things do when they want to last. We let it be two things. The official audio arm of the literary magazine taught kids how to put their voices into the school without flinching. Wave remained the unbranded place where almost could turn into enough without being graded. In May, our robot climbed a ramp that had embarrassed us in January and then reached out its arm and did the small task it had been built for with a grace nobody had remembered to expect. In June, June's expose on cafeteria chicken debuted to more applause than anyone thought such a topic deserved, and he learned the important adult skill of editing himself without deleting his joy. In July, the radio repair shop reopened. The man who ran it had been taking care of his mother in another province. He came back with a smile that knew too much. He looked at my coil and said, "You wrapped that too tight and not tight enough." I gave him a chair in the afternoons. When the year folded itself into its last weeks, Mom found me on the roof. She brought 2 cups of tea, and the bracelet on her wrist found the exact light it wanted and kept it. We watched the city practice for evening. Someone played a trumpet badly and then better. "Your father would be so," she began, and then she did not say proud, because proud is a word that closes its eyes. She said, "Noisy about this." I laughed. "He would tell me to ground my returns." "He would tell you," she said, tapping my chest with one finger so gently that science felt like a conversation, "to listen until you understood that your voice was just one of the stations, and that's why it matters." I think I do," I said, "on good days." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Then have more good days." The last morning of school, Wave started at 6:29 with a cough hidden inside a cord. All 4 of us were there. We kept the power shy. We told a story about a year that had been a workshop and a weather system. We named no one and everyone. We ended with a list titled Geometry Lessons, which was not about shapes so much as about how to occupy one. 1. Triangles are stable because they refuse to be something they're not. 2. Circles are kind because they make room without telling you where to stand. 3. Lines are honest. They go where they said they would. 4. Points are small. Small is not the enemy of true. 5. Almost is just the part of enough that hasn't introduced itself yet. We signed off, as always, with a sentence we had stolen from ourselves. We turned the dial to quiet. We left the bell tower the way you leave a room that has kept your secrets and learned to keep its own. At the gate, students pressed through like a river-breaking character to become itself. Quinn shoved her board into my hands and tugged my sleeve toward the street. "After school," she said. "The park. Bring the map you made by accident." "I didn't make a map," I said, though my backpack was heavier in a way that suggested otherwise. She shook her head. "You made at least 2, maybe 3. "Bees," Hui said, breezing by with a grin. "Bees," Mai repeated, by which she meant, "We're not done." June looped an arm around my shoulders, his hair optimized in new and innovative ways. "We did it," he said, which was both false and exactly true. In the afternoon, under trees that forgave our jokes, we drew our neighborhood on the back of a leftover competition bracket. A noodle shop that had become a listening station, a print shop that had become a stage, a bell tower that had become a mouth, a radio repair store that had become the opposite of gone, a school that had become a we. At the bottom of the page I wrote, in small, neat letters Dad would have mocked for being too careful, "The geometry of almost." Under it, Quinn added, "Often enough." Mai doodled a circle that was actually a spiral. Hui drew a square and then put a door in it. That night, I set the coil on my desk and tuned the little radio to nothing on purpose. The static sounded, for once, exactly like the ocean. I breathed with it until the room understood we were not pretending to be alone. We were practicing being a station. I didn't know what we would be in 12 months. I didn't know if Wave would still fit our hands. I didn't know if the robot would win anything more important than a learned humility. I didn't know if the questions would get easier or if we would simply learn to ask them with less fear. But I knew the frequency now. I knew how to find it. It had a smell, like warm solder and rain just before it decides to become rain. It had a weight, like a coil on a table waiting for a hand. It had a sentence, and the sentence had my father's laughter hidden in its grammar, and my mother's bracelet in its cadence, and my cousin's emojis in its punctuation, and the city's heart under it like a metronome. Stay kind, stay curious, and don't let the first bell tell you who you are. It made the sleeves look as if a bride could lift her arms and find that space had been made for them without any man having to step backward. 2 days before mid-autumn, the mandarin's wife came to the workshop, preceded by a scent that had to be described not as perfume but as a woman's intention. She wore a silk the color of coconut flesh and hair that had never been asked to learn humility. She tapped the floor with the toe of her shoe as if measuring the room. "Show me," she said. Lan showed her. She did not bow more than the cloth demanded. She did not explain what could be seen without words. The mandarin's wife, who had learned to understand things with her fingers even when she decided not to say so with her mouth, touched the border once, twice, and then pretended she had not touched it at all. "It is new," she said. "It is respectful," Lan said, and looked at the woman's wrist where a vein fluttered like a small fish trapped and impatient. "It is made to let a woman move where she must." The mandarin's wife lifted her chin. Respect had been offered without servility. She nodded. "My husband will think it is a cloud," she said. "He is used to naming things." She leaned forward an inch. "He is not always wrong." "I am not always right," Lan said, and the two women smiled the private smile of women who know what the river does to houses and men and mornings. On the morning of the wedding, the city smelled of mango leaves and oil and incense, and the brief terror of boys who had been given tasks that involved flame. The sky pretended not to remember the flood. The bridge wore its new paint with the false modesty of a handsome woman asked to describe herself. Vin stood in a courtyard crowded with expectation, his Audi's cranes ready to take off. He looked like a man about to become a photograph. Lan stood in the small room where the bride was being made into the kind of woman who can enter a house and make it think it has always expected her. Madame Fung's daughter trembled like a water bowl touched by a breath. Lan sewed the last stitch with the steadiness of a woman who has lifted a loom against a river and won. She whispered a prayer into the hem, not for a son, not for a docile mother-in-law, not for money, for room. When the bride raised her arms to be dressed, the sleeves held what they promised. Her shoulders had space. Her breath did not catch on the border. In the courtyard, when the gongs answered each other like old brothers, when the men with their trays of tea performed their choreography with the gravity of priests, when the neighbors assessed and the children made their own opinions the way children do by stealing a sweet and running, Lan stood toward the back and felt the peonies breathe and felt her own lungs find that the room they needed existed even when no one announced it. Vin found her after the last bow of the long series of bows that had been a road and a dance. He took her aside, not into shade, not into a corner, but to the edge of the courtyard where the air moved. "Today," he said, "I learned I can be a son and a husband without being the floor between them." He looked at her, eyes unarmed. "Do you still choose me?" "I choose the version of you that understood that sentence," she said. "And I choose my loom, and I choose my aunt's way of saying yes with a frown. And I choose the border that lets us lift our arms." He smiled. And it was not the smile men practice. It was a man's face when he has been permitted to be not only a man, but this man. "Then let us be boring in the best way," he said. "Let us be the house that does not wash away." "Boring is a blessing," she said. "Boring is a floor." Yes. They married at the end of the season of rain with a ceremony that pleased those it needed to please and did not waste time trying to please the rest. The gifts were sensible. The envy was manageable. The monk with the gentle cough blessed their floorboards and did not pretend to know the future. The head nun ate a sweet and allowed herself a second. On the day Etienne left for the Delta, he came to the workshop dressed not like a man leaving, but like a man visiting. He did not take the compass from his neck. He did not bring the notebook. He brought himself and a mispronounced greeting and hands that had learned to stand still in rooms that did not belong to him. He offered a small wrapped packet to Aunt Thursday for the read, he said, from a man who broke one by leaning on it when he should not have. "It is good to pay for one's education," she said, not unkind now. He turned to Lan. He did not ask to speak alone. The workshop was the right witness. "In a place where men measure and then name," he said carefully in Vietnamese that had learned to know when it was insufficient, "I did not know how to say that my lines were never meant to be fences." He touched the frame of the big loom. "I learned where the border breathes. I will take that and draw it across places that did not ask for it. Perhaps only on my own paper. Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps it will keep me from drowning in a different water." "You will drown and rise and drown again," she said. "That is what you are for." "And you?" he said. "I am for catching the cloth before it lies," she said. They looked at each other, not with hunger, but with the gentleness that comes after hunger has been honored and told to sit. He took her hand not to keep it, but to know it, and then let it go with a care that was itself a kind of map. He bowed to the loom, he bowed to the ant, he bowed to the jar of rainwater, as if it were a shrine. He left. Lan watched him walk down the lane toward the river that had insisted on being in every story. She did not weep. The river had taught her that tears are not the only salt needed to make broth. She turned back to the loom, to the shuttle, to the work that would be necessary whether or not a clever man crossed her threshold and held his whistling in his teeth like a coin. In the evenings afterward, when the air smelled of mango leaves and the bridge learned the footstep of the city the way a man learns to love the sound of his house settling, she and Vin walked to the mid-span and leaned on the rail. They did not perform their love for people who measured such things. They stood and let the river be what it was. Sometimes Vin pointed at a boat and named its cargo with the confidence of a man whose guesses had always been rewarded. Sometimes he guessed wrong and laughed. Sometimes he was silent, and that, too, was a difference. On the first mid-autumn after their marriage, the lamps blossomed on the water again. Lan set one with a prayer not for anything but for the continued availability of the right words when a choice looks like a seam. Her lamp drifted, righted itself, found a current she liked, and went. Nearby, a young woman lifted her arms to adjust a sleeve and smiled when it did not catch. At home, when the house was quiet and the river had lured the city into forgiving it for a while, Lan took out the canvas Etienne had painted and hung it above the loom. The border her border curved and held, it was nothing, and it was everything. It was only ink. It was the difference between a petal that lies and a petal that breathes. It was a woman between iron and prayer, choosing where to make room and where to make a wall. When the shuttle whispered and the thread laid itself down like a promise only the wearer would feel. She thought of all the maps men draw, and all the borders women mend, and of a river that takes and gives, and sometimes returns what it took much later, with an apology shaped like driftwood. She thought of knees that did not hurt that week. She thought of a boy who had learned to tie a knot. She thought of an old loom that had been asked to float, and had decided to be a boat for a day so it could go on being a loom for years. In Hue, where lanterns over the perfume river teach the city night after night how light looks when it agrees to be carried, people said that the bridge had changed their lives. They were right and wrong. The bridge had given them new ways to arrive. The border on land sleeves had taught them, very quietly, how to lift their arms when they arrived. And in a workshop that smelled sometimes of rain and sometimes of dye and always of patience, a woman moved the bowl a finger's width, and the room admitted it had been waiting for that space.